Today on Awaken and Ascend, we are going to get the antidote to drama. Our special guest, breakthrough specialist and leadership coach Luann Horobin, will share strategies to broaden awareness and shift your perspective. I'm super excited for this conversation today, Luann. I'm so grateful that you're here. Thanks for joining us.
I'm so grateful to be your guest. I really feel very aligned with your audience as well, and the whole purpose of that. So I'm excited to be here with you as well, and thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have something very interesting to share because there's obviously been a lot of drama brought into our lives these days, and as multisensory beings living these multidimensional lives, we're taking in so much stimulation all the time, which can feel pretty dramatic and intense. And so, you bringing us these strategies to really broaden our awareness, to shift our perspective, and to be able to live our best life is so vital right now. So I'm interested, Luann, in how you actually got started on your path. What lit things up for you in this direction?
Well, that's a good question because that was in an earlier stage of my life where I was, well, first of all, I'll just go a bit earlier. I was raised on the farm, and so I always had a lot of energy, a lot of achievement. It was a wonderful community environment. And so there was a lot of really good core values that I was able to enjoy and that I lived by. And as I got into my early adult years, all of these wonderful strategies that I had kind of came to a peak all at once. And I found myself in a very short time frame being let go from a role, as well as the same time I became a single parent, single mom. And it was a way more, way more than I had really ever experienced at one point in time. But it's not something that you can just kind of say, oh, well, I'll do this tomorrow. I mean, they all need to be looked after right away. And I didn't really feel that I had all the tools for that. The ones that I was using were helpful, but I found that it felt like a cumbersome process. And I didn't feel like I had like a lot of time to get things sorted out. So I started looking further, and if speaking of drama, that was an ultimate time of drama. There was it was pretty much drama in all parts of my life, but I didn't really see it that way. I kept seeing it as, well, I just take this step. I just take this step. But that was the slow process. And I thought, I have to do something differently because I'm going to be like, my daughter's going to be grown up by the time we get through this. That's probably not true, but that's how it feels sometimes, when you're facing something that's kind of an obstacle. So I started looking into how could I do this differently, which led me into understanding more about how the subconscious mind works. And it was like opening up a huge box because I didn't even realize how many sort of limiting patterns I had and how many times the way to bring in perspective, how I was looking at things was really also affecting what I was getting out of it. So it led me on a journey of understanding more and more and more how the subconscious mind works. It was kind of intriguing to me. It's kind of like one of those insatiable appetite things because once I started learning it and discovering, oh my goodness, have I ever got some windows of opportunity, I guess you could say. So as I was working with it, I just noticed things began to turn around, but I also felt it wasn't just my outside world. I felt so much more grounded internally as well. But my view of everything it just really changed. So it's been it was a significant turning point at that point, and it has continued to evolve to the point where I now really recognize the way that we see things pretty much determines how we will experience them. But there's a lot of things that we can do to see things in terms of perspective in a different way, to have a different experience. And so in a nutshell, like, I hope that answered your question, kind of.
Yeah, yeah, and taking on a different lens and having a whole different perspective, which creates a whole different experience,
Mhm.
essentially. And so, how do you actually see things now, Luann?
Now how I see things is quite a bit different. I'm very aware that and I kind of actually, this is how I help people too, is to become aware of what is that belief that is driving the situation I'm having.
Hmm.
Because and so if can you bear with a moment of like sort of sciencey kind of talk?
Okay, let's do it.
Okay. Well, because the subconscious mind runs 90% of our mind, and the conscious mind, where we make decisions with, it's actually 10%.
Huh.
So typically, when we're trying to change something and we're working with it, we're actually working with the 10% of, because the subconscious mind actually filters how we even see it. So we're going to see things differently depending on what I'm believing in that moment.
Hmm.
So when they say like through the rose-colored glasses or not, that's very true because that's actually the filter. Um, so I so how I see things differently now is I've learned how to shift that, and I use a lot of questions because I'm also aware, a little bit of more science here, is that I call it, to simplify it, I would call it red brain and green brain. Green brain is when we can look at things and we can see something possible. We can see that we can create something. We have that sort of, you don't have to know the way, but sometimes when you run into an experience, you just feel like, oh, I know I can do it.
Hmm.
That's what I would call green brain. That's the part of your brain that creates those endorphins and that curiosity, which gives us energy. But when we're looking at something from a problem, it actually works very differently. It actually triggers what I call red brain, which is actually cortisol, and cortisol actually shuts down green brain. So that's why when we're focused on a problem, it's really hard to get out of it, because the part of our brain that helps us do that is definitely not working at its peak. So what I've learned is I can ask a question and it will actually shift my perspective. So for example, do you want an example?
Okay, let's have an example.
Yeah. So if I'm facing something that's kind of challenging, then what I would do is I would ask myself, if I'm seeing it as a problem, first thing I know is that's the, I'm not going to probably solve it there. So then I will ask myself a question. What if this wasn't a problem?
Hmm.
What if I could see this so that it wasn't a problem? And that brings forward another part of our thinking, our brain, and it actually will show us, oh, here's a step you could take, or here's another step you could take. And once you take that one step, you get that momentum going. And so I think it's just from really learning what I see is going to be what I experience. And so I want to be able to work with that.
Yeah, and we can learn from asking those questions, right? And being open to the
Yes.
answers and possibilities and the path to the solution of the different
Yes.
experience. And it's interesting that you mentioned about the rose-colored glasses because I have to wear prescription glasses, and my prescription sunglasses are rose-colored.
Oh,
And I love that because, well, I naturally see things that way in life anyway. But when I wear them and I'm out in nature and I'm taking pictures, it looks a certain way because I'm seeing them through, literally through my
yes.
rose-colored glasses. And then I look at the picture, I'm like, this isn't at all, you know, how I was seeing it and perceiving it and wanting to share how it was looking. And then I
Yeah.
try to take the picture through my glasses, just doesn't work. But what it made me think of is how we often try to make people see things our way, see things the way that we see them, you know, almost trying to convince them or share with them. And
Yes.
that's often not the case because they have their own subconscious, their own filters, their own lens that they're seeing through. And so, how do we work with that, even, you know, to have shared experiences when we're seeing through a different lens?
Well, here's where I would suggest questions again.
Mm-hmm.
Because questions can bring forward more, how is that person seeing it? Because you raised a really good point. Because if I'm trying to, let's say, convince someone or influence someone a certain way, I'm doing that from my own perspective.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably not really the truth of the situation. But if I was to ask the person, like, how do you see this? Or another question is, how do you see this working?
Mm-hmm.
If you're in a situation where you're both using different approaches, how do you see this working? Because I have a fundamental belief many minds make light work.
Yeah.
But at that point, that's when we're dealing with the truth. So if you're not really dealing with the truth and you're trying to influence something, it's not likely to be really successful. If you ask someone, how do you see this? Then you know what you really can work with. And
Mm-hmm.
if you have a different viewpoint, how do you see this about blah, 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 that is perhaps my viewpoint?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
then they have a choice to look at it another way rather than just kind of be, because typically I think we can probably agree it's kind of human nature. We're not too fond of being convinced of things.
Yeah. It's true, but it is fun to be open to possibilities. Like you shared about the red brain versus and the green brain, right? And
Yes.
I haven't heard that before, but I love that. And I lit up to this new idea and a new perspective and wanting to see it through that way. And I could see it through that way, in the
Yes.
way that you shared it. And so
Oh,
I really love that. I love that we get to share opinions and concepts and perspectives and take that in. It's new information that we're learning to process.
yes.
Yeah.
That's a very simplified, that's a very simplified analogy. And it is kind of like that. And I say that because green brain, it's kind of like the stoplights, right? And the
Yeah.
go lights. Green brain literally is go, and stop brain really is stop. Red brain is literally stop.
Yeah, and it's a great
Yes.
way to remember things when we can easily grasp a concept like that, when we simplify things, because our minds overcomplicate everything.
Yes,
They can really spin out of control.
that's really so true.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things, the ways that I find that, like sometimes it seems like such a simple concept, like you just look at things differently, but there's actually a real science behind that, in
Mhm.
that um sometimes it depends on the approach we use. Like, so for example, maybe we could do something like we could read a book or something, and that can give us a different perspective. But what that is like is it's kind of like, um, I don't know, let me put it this way. It's kind of like adding an app to your phone.
Mhm.
I have another way of seeing this, I have another way of using this. When I actually look at the belief behind it, that's like doing a total update to your phone.
Mm.
You will actually, the whole experience will be different because it's not running the same way. It's um it actually is creating new neural pathways when you change these beliefs, actually right at the level of the subconscious. You can actually change them. And that's what people say. They have a different experience. But I can vouch for that as well, because when we change our perspective, like I said, what we see
Mhm.
will be what we experience.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to go deeper into experience because there is what, the mind takes in and our senses take
Yes.
in, but it's also how our body senses too, right? And the
Yes.
felt experience of it. And so how do we communicate what the body is experiencing and what the mind is
Okay.
interpreting, so to speak?
Really good point.
Hmm.
Well, so like I said, the subconscious mind runs 90% of our mind. The reason it's 90% is because it actually runs our body. So our beliefs affect and kind of determine how we feel in our body.
Hmm.
Because when we're afraid of something, we will feel tense. because that's what it's doing in our body, right?
Yeah, yeah.
When we're concerned about something, we will have tension. And this is why when we have, this is why stress is such a long-term detriment, because it's working with the body, and it actually is creating a change in the body. Is it's actually, that's how it's literally shutting things down, which makes everything really tense. So that's
Mm,
why when people have they begin to develop things like maybe sore shoulders, or sometimes people develop from stress, they develop like stomach pain or stomach discomfort, which can end up being stomach pain.
mhm.
So that's because our subconscious is actually running our body. So long-term stress actually does affect our health. It actually will impact our body. So to answer your question then, when we learn to just, even the first step is awareness, is just being aware. That's the very first step to change, because it makes us be present now. A belief is taking us into the past or into the future.
Mm.
And so by being present now, we can right there, we can begin to look at what it is. And then there's the next part, which means until you can see something, it's really hard to change something that you can't see.
Mm, this is true. Yeah,
And that's the way, because beliefs are a 90%, it's why it can run us, and it's why we can have long-term habits that are difficult to change.
yeah.
And and remember, if you try to change it, let's say reading a book, that's like putting a new phone on, like a new app in your phone.
Mm,
That's not really going to change it. Your phone's
mhm.
still going to run the same. You'll be able to have different options, but that belief will still be running you and how you use those options, right? Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And talking about these apps, it also makes me think of our operating system, just like our
Yes.
operating system on the computer or our device, but also our bodies and our minds and how we're
Yes.
operating, right? What frequency we're operating at, even from our values, what values we're operating from. And the more tuned in and aware, as you say, we are to that, then the more conscious choice we can make and really broaden our perspective and our awareness. And something that I thought of too, as you were talking about it, something I often talk about when we're tending to something, we
Mm-hmm.
can check into whether we're tending from tension or tending with tenderness. And that tension is that really uptight, intense, rigid
Yes.
kind of way of being. And with tenderness, it's a lot softer and gentler and more
Yes.
open and expansive. And we're still tending to the same thing, but how we approach that, the frequency we're operating from, is very different. And it'll have a very different experience for us on all levels of our being, and also to the end result, right? Of what we're tending to, how that's going to turn out. Because it's the energy that we're putting into it as well.
That's 100% correct. By when we change our beliefs, we literally do change our operating system, and we will change. It changes how we see things.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It's like we don't see things and interpret things the same way. So a large part of perspective is really, it establishes meaning. So we have can have a perspective of
Mm-hmm.
it being, something that makes me tense and fearful.
Yeah.
Or I can say, a question I ask myself is, what would I do on the other side of fear? Like, what would I do if there was no fear here?
Yes.
So I can take that one, or I can take the other one or the other, right?
There's always a choice. Yeah.
Yes. And it gives me two different and completely different viewpoints. But to your point, it's actually two different forms of energy also. So it really is our operating system. So you nailed it right on there.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And we've been talking about, broadening our awareness as a way to be an antidote, I guess, to drama,
Yes,
right? So what would be the opposite of drama then? What would be
right.
the
So
results
I
of that?
think as the antidote to drama, because sometimes when we have drama, we might not really recognize it right away.
Mm.
Sometimes we look at it as, well, I need to go fix a thing, or I need to look after this thing. But we don't really necessarily always look at it first as being within us.
Oh, yeah.
And so, like, sometimes we do. Sometimes we think, oh, why am I thinking this? But kind of not always. So, a way of working with drama is looking at our own perspective first.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where our beliefs come in. What is the perspective or meaning that I'm giving this? If I could, because I could give it more than one meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other, depending on what that meaning is and how that situation unfolds, then I can look at, so what are the kinds of questions I could ask myself
Mm.
about this? Um, One of the other questions that I ask is, am I feeling this way because of my past, or because of something I feel about my future? Because that's the meaning that usually creates the tension of the drama. That's within me, myself.
Mm.
And quite often, if we look at something different, we will work with that situation in a completely different way.
I can really relate to that, Luann, because a couple of questions that I often ask if something comes up is,
Mhm.
where is this coming from? And I mean that as in, like, where is it coming from? Like, what's the
Yes.
source of this? Or what's the deeper truth embedded in this, or, hidden
Yes.
in this? And then you start to excavate a little bit, you dig deeper, literally,
Well, you
into what's
do.
really going on. Where is this coming from? Why is this happening? As in, like, what's the lesson here? What's the deeper truth that's embedded in this? And I think that really opens up perspective as well. When we ask the right questions, then there's a whole
Mhm.
field of possibilities of why that could be, instead of reacting and attaching a specific meaning to that, right?
Mhm.
Or thinking we know, or jumping to conclusions, for example, or
Mhm.
becoming defensive about
Yeah.
something. Yeah.
Yes. No, I completely agree with you. And if I may add another question to that,
Yes.
another question that is helpful in perspective is, how would I deal with this situation if I had a different belief?
Yeah.
So let's say if I'm believing something about something that maybe uh, comes from something from my past or something from my future, whatever that might, whichever one that might be. How would I work with this situation if I didn't have this belief?
Mm.
Which is something like, how would I work with this if I wasn't afraid?
Yeah.
If I didn't have fear, what would I do?
Yeah. We can approach it with curiosity.
Yes, curiosity is one of the most wonderful tools, and especially valuable in perspective.
I'm also hearing courage and compassion in there
Yes.
as well.
And I think courage and compassion are their partners,
Mm.
because um the part that doesn't really help us is if we're not compassionate with ourselves.
Yeah.
That it's kind of, it doesn't just help us see things in a way that could allow us to approach it differently, because we're first
Literally.
being hard on ourselves.
Yeah. It's literally working against us.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right. And if we're being hard on ourselves, it's even harder to be courageous.
Yeah. You're
you
right.
know it's very hard to be courageous. So if we can find even one good thing about ourselves, and one good thing, like, well, I tried my best, even if that's what we can find for ourselves, that's a win.
Yeah.
That will help us to just have some courage. I tried my best. Okay, then I can try something else. I can try my best.
Hmm.
Yes.
There's always something, and we always have
Yes.
choice, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
You
I
know,
love that. I love that,
it-
Luann. You've really broadened some perspectives here, and I know that you have a special gift for the audience to go even deeper in this work as well. So, do you
yes.
want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. Well, I've prepared a quick summary of some just easy to use tools that can help us to shift perspective so that we can really have our best experience, show up as our best self, and get past the obstacle of perspective when it does show up. So, in other words, to help us, um, re- I guess I'm going to call it release the drama,
Mm.
and because it's very costly to us as individuals, but it's costly to us in our life
Mm-hmm.
as well. And so this is a tool it's very simple. Just a few tools that people can use to help shift their perspective and take a closer look. And it's kind of exciting.
That is exciting. It's so great. I'm going to have a link for that, everyone, just in the show notes below. So be sure to check that out. You'll also find a couple of other guides like Living Your Passion and Purpose and Soul Care as well that are in there, and different ways to contact both Luann and I. But Luann, I wonder if there's anything else that you would like to share on the show today.
I think that, this has been the most helpful tool. And I think one of the things, it's not just helpful in my life. I think what has really helped me understand is, there is a saying that I didn't know how stressed I was until I wasn't.
Oh, yeah.
And I would say that is the benefit that I have understood and been able to work with through these processes. There's several aspects. There's multiple aspects of things that we can approach and work with to turn situations into a better experience, but also being able to just stay in that space of really feeling like, I really did my best today. I really can live my best life. We can create our best life. I totally
Yes.
believe that. So,
Yes.
yeah, that's, you know, feeling good at our soul level. That's the feeling I want to spread in the world.
Ah, I love that so much, Luann. And what if people want to reach out to you and they want to be able to work with you? How would
Oh,
they do
yes.
that?
Yeah. Uh, the best way to reach me at the moment is probably to contact me through LinkedIn. I'm really easy to contact in there, and I check it frequently. And I'd love to hear from people, and I'd love to help you. I do individual strategy sessions,
Great.
mind alignment sessions,
Hmm.
and where we take something that someone wants to work with, and we take a look at, like, how can we turn this around, and we actually do turn that around. So I've often said too, we do things that other people say can't be done.
Making the impossible
That's fun.
possible. Oh,
Yeah,
yeah. Because it's totally
it is fun.
possible.
It is fun. There are simple tools. So I like to actually teach people the tools so that, when they run into a situation, they have the tools. They don't have to contact me, every time they run into something. They
Mhm.
actually have the tools. And I think that's why people tend to progress like really quickly once they start working with it, because they have the tools. It's just makes a whole lot of things a lot easier. So
Fantastic. Yeah, so contact Luann for the tools. And you'll get those.
that's
And
right. Yeah, and the
yeah,
strategies.
yeah. And I'd love to know, every one of you that have been tuning in, what your biggest takeaways from this is, what's shifted in your perspective. So write us in the comments. We'd always read those and would love to hear from you. Luann, it's been such a pleasure having you here. I'm so grateful that you showed up and shifted our perspective today.
Yeah. Well, thank you. It's been a real delight speaking with you, and thank you again. This is just a real privilege for me, and thank you a lot.
Oh,
I'm
thank
I'm
you.
excited to share this.
Well, I'm so deeply grateful for all of you that have been tuning in to Awaken and Ascend. We're here every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Pacific, so make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. We'll see you again next time. Bye for now.
Thank you.